When she faced her husband and his mistress in court, the silence was overwhelming. With an almost disconcerting calmness, she announced, "I have a surprise witness." In an instant, all eyes turned to the door. And then, the unthinkable happened. The husband's face turned pale. The unfaithful husband could never have anticipated who was about to walk in and shatter his perfect facade. The autumn sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Phelps Tower's executive suite, illuminating Paige Phelps as she stood at the helm of her empire. The Manhattan skyline stretched before her, a testament to the legacy her father had built and entrusted to her capable hands. At 38, Paige embodied the perfect fusion of old money grace and new world business acumen, her Chanel suit and Cartier watch subtle indicators of the wealth she commanded with understated elegance. "The Q3 projections are exceeding expectations, Mrs. Phelps," Thomas Chen, her chief financial officer, reported from the Brazilian rosewood conference table behind her. "The acquisition of Morgan Technologies has already yielded a 12% increase in our tech division's revenue." Paige turned from the window, her Louboutin heels clicking softly on the marble floor. "And the integration of their R&D team?" "Seamless," responded Simon Blake, her husband and chief operations officer, his Tom Ford suit as impeccable as his Harvard MBA credentials, though we might want to consider restructuring their benefit packages to align with our corporate standards. Paige studied her husband's face, noting the slight tension around his steel-gray eyes. After 15 years of marriage, she could read him like a Bloomberg terminal. "Let's maintain their current packages for now. Dad always said happy engineers are innovative engineers." The mention of Richard Phelps brought a momentary silence to the room. 6 months had passed since the legendary founder of Phelps Industries had surrendered to pancreatic cancer, leaving behind a $4.2 billion empire and a legacy of corporate innovation that had transformed American industry. Speaking of innovation, Ashley Morrison, Simon's recently hired executive assistant, interjected with perhaps too much familiarity, "The new Sustainable Energy Initiative proposal is ready for your review." The young woman's Versace dress seemed conspicuously expensive for her position, but Paige dismissed the thought. "Thank you, Ashley. Leave it on my desk." Paige's voice carried the polite but firm authority that had earned her Fortune magazine's Most Influential Women in Business cover story last spring. As the meeting concluded, Paige caught a glimpse of something in her antique Venetian mirror, a look exchanged between Simon and Ashley that lasted a fraction too long. She filed it away in her mind, next to other small observations that had been accumulating like dust on a ledger. Later that evening, in their Upper East Side penthouse, Paige watched her children through the kitchen's marble archway. Madison, 13, was helping her younger brother Alexander with his math homework at the custom-made oak dining table. The scene would have been perfect for a Norman Rockwell painting, if Rockwell had painted in front of a backdrop of Central Park and priceless modern art. "The children miss you," Paige said softly as Simon emerged from his home office. His Hermes tie loosened. "You've been working late a lot recently." Simon poured himself 3 fingers of 25-year-old Macallan. "The Morgan integration is crucial. You know that better than anyone." He didn't meet her eyes. "Besides, isn't that what you wanted? For me to prove myself worthy of the Phelps name?" The words carried a bite that made Paige's diamond tennis bracelet feel suddenly heavy. "That's not fair, Simon. Dad gave you the COO position because he believed in you. Did he? Or did he do it to keep his only daughter happy?" Simon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You know what they say in the board meetings when they think I can't hear, that I married into success. No one who matters thinks that." Paige moved closer, her hand reaching for his arm. "You've earned your place." Simon's phone buzzed. He checked it quickly, angling the screen away from her. "Emergency at the office. The Morgan tech team is having issues with the server migration." At 9 p.m. "Technology doesn't sleep, darling." He kissed her cheek, the gesture mechanical. "Don't wait up." As Simon's private elevator descended from their penthouse, Paige walked to her father's study, preserved exactly as he'd left it. The smell of leather and aged wood enveloped her as she sat in his Baroque desk chair, worth more than most people's cars. "I wish you were here, Dad," she whispered, running her fingers over the antique desk's worn leather inlay. Her eyes fell on a photo of her father teaching her to read financial statements when she was just a girl, his patient smile captured in sterling silver frame. The intercom buzzed, startling her. "Mrs. Phelps?" It was Gerard, their doorman. A messenger just delivered this from the office. Minutes later, Paige stared at the unmarked envelope in her hands. Inside was a single photograph that would shatter her world, but she didn't know that yet. For now it sat unopened on the desk that had launched a billion-dollar empire, while somewhere in the city, her husband's Aston Martin purred through the Manhattan night, carrying him not to the office, but to a luxury condo in Tribeca where Ashley Morrison waited. The seeds of betrayal were already sprouting in the fertile soil of wealth and ambition, but Paige Phelps, like the city that stretched out before her window, remained illuminated in the glow of success, unaware that some of the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. The photograph trembled in Paige's manicured hands as dawn broke over Manhattan. She'd spent the night in her father's study, dissecting every detail of the image. Simon entering the Tribeca Grand Hotel, Ashley's hand discreetly placed on his lower back. The timestamp showed 11:42 p.m. during last week's emergency board meeting. Mrs. Phelps? Sebastian Torres, the head of building maintenance, stood respectfully at the study's threshold. For 20 years, he'd been the first to arrive and the last to leave, his weathered face a fixture of Phelps Tower as permanent as the marble columns in the lobby. "I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's something you should know." Paige quickly slipped the photo into her Hermes portfolio. "What is it, Sebastian?" "It's about Mr. Blake and Ms. Morrison." He hesitated, his calloused hands fidgeting with his maintenance keys. "They've been accessing the executive floor after hours. Security logs show their keycards being used at odd hours, but Mr. Blake ordered us not to log these entries anymore." The Wall Street Journal on her desk suddenly seemed to mock her with its headline, "Phelps Industries, a legacy of trust." Paige's voice remained steady, years of boardroom battles having taught her to mask vulnerability. "How long has this been happening?" 3 months, give or take." Sebastian's eyes held a paternal concern that reminded her of her father. "Your father, he always said to watch out for you even after—" He trailed off, leaving unspoken the memory of Richard Phelps's final days. Before Paige could respond, her iPhone lit up with a message from Walter Greenwich, the head of their legal department. "Emergency meeting in the Vector Room. Morgan Technologies threatening to pull out of merger." The Vector Room, with its hand-carved Indonesian teak table and guests' chairs worth $5,000 each, had hosted some of the most significant mergers in corporate history. Now it held a different kind of tension as Paige entered to find Simon already seated at the head of the table, her father's position. "The Morgan team is concerned about patent overlaps," Simon announced, not moving from the chair. Ashley stood behind him, tablet in hand, her Dior perfume hanging heavily in the air. "They're demanding a complete restructuring of the deal." "Impossible," Thomas Chen interjected, his Rolex glinting as he gestured to the holographic projections floating above the table. "We've already begun integrating their AI protocols into our infrastructure." Walter Greenwich cleared his throat, his bow tie as precisely arranged as his legal arguments. "There's more. They're specifically requesting that Simon take the lead on the integration. They're questioning the current leadership structure." Paige felt every eye in the room turn to her. She'd grown up in rooms like this, watching her father turn crisis into opportunity. Now, seeing Simon's barely concealed smirk, she understood. This was a power play. "Show them the Morrison reports," she commanded, watching Ashley's perfectly composed face flicker with surprise. "I'm not familiar with those reports," Simon said smoothly. "No, you wouldn't be." Paige pressed a button on the table's built-in console. The holographic display shifted to reveal a comprehensive analysis of every after-hours meeting, every modified security log, every suspicious financial transaction from the past 3 months. "I had our internal audit team compile these when the merger numbers started looking too perfect." The room fell silent as damning evidence floated in the air like corporate ghosts. Ashley's hand moved instinctively to her Cartier necklace, a recent purchase that her salary couldn't possibly justify. "You've been falsifying integration reports," Paige continued, her voice arctic, "making the merger look smoother than it is to push it through quickly. The question is why?" Simon's mask finally cracked. "You had me investigated?" "No, Simon. I protected our company's interests. Something my father taught me to do before he made you COO." Paige turned to Walter. "The Morgan team isn't threatening to pull out, are they? That was just to get me here, to ambush me with this leadership challenge." Walter's silence was answer enough. Simon stood, his Tom Ford suit unable to hide the tension in his shoulders. "The board needs stability, Paige. A clear vision. not someone clinging to Daddy's legacy. Is that what you told Ashley when you promised her my job? Paige watched her husband's face pale. Oh yes, I know about that too, along with the private account in the Cayman Islands where you've been siphoning merger funds. A new figure appeared in the doorway, James Morrison, head of the SEC's Corporate Fraud Division. Hope I'm not interrupting. His off-the-rack suit stood out among the room's bespoke luxury, but his authority filled the space. Mrs. Phelps called us last week with some interesting documentation. Ashley stumbled backward, her Louboutins catching on the custom carpet. Simon, you said this was foolproof. You promised— Shut up, Simon hissed, but it was too late. Mr. Blake, James continued, we have some questions about certain offshore transactions. Miss Morrison, you'll want to call your lawyer. As federal agents filled the Vector room, Paige caught Sebastian's eye through the glass walls. He gave her a slight nod, and she remembered something her father once told her. In business, Paige, your most valuable assets aren't listed on any balance sheet. That evening, as the story broke across financial news networks, Paige sat in her father's study, holding a different photograph, one of her whole family, at the company's 30th anniversary gala. She studied Simon's face in the image, wondering if the man she'd loved had ever really existed. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You have no idea what you're up against. Outside her window, Manhattan's lights began to twinkle on, each one a star in the constellation of power and wealth she'd inherited. But now, those lights seemed to hold secrets in their glow, and Paige Phelps realized that defending her legacy would require more than just business acumen. It would demand every lesson her father had taught her, and some he never could. The real battle was just beginning. Thunder rolled across Manhattan's skyline as Paige stood in her private elevator, ascending to the penthouse office where her world was about to shatter. The SEC's preliminary investigation had barely scratched the surface of Simon's deception. What awaited her on the 87th floor would transform a corporate scandal into something far more personal. The elevator's brass doors opened to reveal Ashley Morrison standing at Paige's desk, hastily shoving documents into a Gucci briefcase. Their eyes met in a moment of crystallized tension, the city's storm-darkened backdrop framing their confrontation through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Mrs. Phelps, Ashley straightened, her composure cracking. I was just destroying evidence. Paige stepped into the office, her voice deadly calm. Or perhaps collecting your 30 pieces of silver. Lightning flashed, illuminating the guilt on Ashley's face. You don't understand, Simon said. Oh, I understand perfectly now. Paige moved to her father's vintage Dunhill desk, pressing a hidden button beneath its leather inlay. Steel shutters silently descended over the office doors. What I don't understand is why. Was it just the money, Ashley? The promise of power? Or did you actually believe Simon would leave his comfortable life for his secretary? Ashley's perfectly maintained facade crumbled. He loves me. We've been planning this for over a year. The Morgan merger was just phase one. Phase one of what? The words carried the weight of every betrayal Paige had uncovered. Of taking everything. Simon's voice cut through the tension as he emerged from the executive bathroom, his presence filling the room with a coldness that rivaled the storm outside. Did you really think your father chose you to run this company because of your abilities, Paige? He chose you because you were his only option, his only child, his desperate legacy. Paige's hand instinctively went to the sapphire pendant her father had given her on her first day as CEO. You're wrong, Simon. Dad chose me because he knew what you really were, a parasite hiding behind a Savile Row suit. Simon laughed, the sound as hollow as his morals. Your father was a fool who built his empire on outdated principles. Loyalty, trust. The modern business world runs on different currency. He pulled out his phone, displaying a series of encrypted messages. Right now, the board is receiving evidence of your mental instability, your paranoid accusations, your harassment of innocent employees. Evidence you fabricated, Paige stated, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. Evidence that will stand up in court, Simon corrected, along with testimonies from concerned colleagues about your erratic behavior since your father's death. The board will have no choice but to remove you for the company's stability. Ashley moved to Simon's side, their unified front a mockery of corporate loyalty. It's already done, Paige. The emergency board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning. But Paige smiled, the expression reminiscent of her father's most triumphant moments. Is that why you came here tonight? To destroy the real evidence? She pressed another button on the desk. Hidden panels in the walls slid open, revealing state-of-the-art surveillance equipment. Dad always said trust was good, but verification was better. Every office in this building has been recording continuously for the past month. Every conversation, every secret meeting, every stolen kiss in the executive elevator. Simon's confidence wavered. You're bluffing. Those recordings would be inadmissible. In a criminal court, perhaps, a new voice interjected. Sebastian stepped out from the hidden security room, holding a stack of hard drives. But the Court of Corporate Governance plays by different rules. The janitor, Ashley sneered. This is your trump card. Sebastian's weathered face held no emotion as he placed the hard drives on the desk. Head of corporate security, actually. Richard Phelps knew the best way to protect his company was to have eyes and ears everywhere. Who better to go unnoticed than the man who cleans the floors? Simon lunged for the hard drives, but Sebastian moved with unexpected agility, blocking his path. Don't embarrass yourself further, Mr. Blake. The copies have already been distributed to select board members. You're lying, Simon snarled, but his designer suit was beginning to show stress wrinkles, his carefully maintained image cracking. Am I? Page pressed a final button, and the office's hidden screens came to life, displaying dozens of incriminating scenes. Simon and Ashley plotting in secret meetings, financial documents being falsified, offshore accounts being arranged, a comprehensive tapestry of betrayal woven in high-definition clarity. It's over, Simon, Page declared. The board isn't meeting tomorrow to remove me. They're meeting to witness your resignation and to begin criminal proceedings. Ashley's knees buckled, sending her Louboutin skidding on the marble floor. Simon, you promised. You said it was foolproof. Shut up! Simon's mask finally shattered completely. He pulled a legal document from his briefcase, throwing it onto the desk. You think this is over? I still own 20% of this company through our marriage. I'll tie you up in litigation for years. I'll drain the company's resources until there's nothing left. No, you won't. Sebastian produced another document, this one bearing Richard Phelps's personal seal. Mr. Phelps amended the company's articles of incorporation before his death. Any executive found engaging in corporate espionage or fraud automatically forfeits their shares. He added it after catching you accessing confidential files 3 years ago. Simon's face went ashen. That's impossible. I covered my tracks. Dad never confronted you, Page revealed, her voice thick with emotion. He wanted to give you a chance to prove him wrong, to prove you could be worthy of his trust and mine. She turned to the window, watching lightning split the sky. That was his greatest weakness. He always wanted to believe the best in people. Security is on their way up, Sebastian announced quietly, checking his phone, along with the FBI's white-collar crime division. Ashley began to sob, her mascara creating dark rivers down her cheeks. Simon, do something! But Simon Blake, master of corporate deception, had run out of moves. He slumped into a leather chair worth more than most people's monthly salary, his empire of lies crumbling around his Italian leather shoes. Page walked to her father's portrait, which hung prominently on the office wall. You know what the true irony is, Simon? If you had simply been patient, loyal, you would have had everything. Dad was grooming you to be my partner, not my subordinate. We could have ruled this empire together. The office doors slid open, admitting a team of FBI agents led by James Morrison. As they began reading rights and applying handcuffs, Page turned to Sebastian. Thank you for everything. Sebastian nodded solemnly. Your father saved my daughter's life 15 years ago, paid for her entire cancer treatment without asking for anything in return. This was the least I could do. As Simon and Ashley were led away in handcuffs, their designer clothes clashing with the cold steel restraints, Page remained in her office, watching the storm rage over Manhattan. The world would soon know the full story, how the wife of a corporate betrayer had outmaneuvered her would-be usurpers, how old loyalties had proven stronger than new deceptions. But for now, in the gathering darkness, Page Phelps stood alone in the house her father built, knowing that while she had won this battle, the war for her legacy was far from over. Tomorrow would bring shareholders to appease, merger partners to reassure, and a company to rebuild. The night grew darker, but Page remained at her window, her reflection overlaying the city lights like a queen surveying her domain. In her hand she held the sapphire pendant, its blue depths holding memories of easier days and simpler truths. But she was her father's daughter, and she knew that in the world of power and privilege, nothing worth having ever came easily. The storm raged on, but Paige's mind was already racing ahead to the challenges that awaited. The corporate world was like a shark tank. Show any sign of weakness, and the predators would circle. She needed to move quickly to stabilize the company and prevent any opportunistic takeover attempts. Mrs. Phelps, Walter Greenwich appeared in the doorway, his bow tie slightly askew, a rare sight that spoke to the evening's tension. The board members are requesting an emergency conference call. They've heard rumors about the arrests. Paige straightened her Chanel jacket. Set it up in the conference room. And Walter, have Thomas Chen prepare the quarterly projections. The board will need reassurance that this won't affect our financial stability. As her team scrambled to arrange the call, Paige noticed Sebastian quietly gathering his equipment. "Wait," she called out. "I need you in that meeting." Sebastian looked startled. "Me? But I'm just the man who helped save this company," Paige finished. "The board needs to understand that while Simon may have betrayed us, our corporate security has never been stronger." The next hour was a masterclass in crisis management. Paige stood before the holographic displays, showing the faces of board members from around the world, each one demanding explanations and assurances. "The Morgan merger will proceed as planned," she declared, her voice steady. "Our internal audit has confirmed that despite Simon's attempts at manipulation, the fundamental synergies between our companies remain sound. In fact, without the artificial timelines he was pushing, we can now ensure a more thorough and beneficial integration." "And what of the company's reputation?" demanded Victoria Hartley, their oldest board member, her face stern through the holographic display. "This scandal could destroy decades of goodwill." "On the contrary," Paige countered, nodding to Sebastian. "This situation demonstrates that our corporate governance systems work. We uncovered the fraud internally, dealt with it decisively, and protected our shareholders' interests. The market will respect that." As she spoke, Thomas Chen distributed updated financial projections showing minimal impact from the scandal. The numbers told a story of resilience and strength, one that even the most skeptical board members couldn't ignore. "There's more," Paige continued, pulling up a new set of documents. "In light of recent events, I'm implementing a comprehensive corporate restructuring. New checks and balances, enhanced transparency measures, and a revised executive compensation structure that rewards long-term stability over short-term gains." The proposals had been her father's idea, drafted in his final months but never implemented. Now, they would become his final gift to the company, a vaccine against future betrayals. After the call ended, Walter approached with a concerned expression. "The media is gathering in the lobby. They want a statement." Paige looked out at the storm-swept city. The rain had stopped, but lightning still flickered in the distance. "Have them set up in the main conference room. It's time to control the narrative." Before heading down, she stopped by her private bathroom to freshen up. The woman in the mirror looked different somehow. Stronger, harder perhaps, but also more certain. She touched up her lipstick, adjusted her father's sapphire pendant, and took a deep breath. The main conference room was packed with reporters when she entered, their cameras tracking her every move. The familiar space, with its hand-carved panels and crystal chandeliers, now felt like a gladiatorial arena. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Tonight, Phelps Industries demonstrated why we've been a trusted name in American business for over 3 decades. We uncovered an attempt at corporate fraud, dealt with it swiftly, and emerged stronger." As she delivered her statement, Paige could almost feel her father's presence, his lessons echoing in her mind. The true test of leadership isn't avoiding crises, it's how you handle them when they come. Hours later, after the reporters had gone and the night shift had taken over, Paige found herself back in her father's study. Sebastian knocked softly on the door. "The security upgrades you requested are in place," he reported, "and I've assembled a dossier on every executive who had close contact with Simon over the past year, just in case there are more surprises." Paige nodded, grateful for his thoroughness. "Sebastian, why didn't you ever tell me about my father helping your daughter?" He smiled sadly. "Your father asked me not to. He said true kindness doesn't need recognition. That's why I knew I could trust you when I saw how you treated the maintenance staff just like he did." As Sebastian turned to leave, Paige called after him. "My father was wrong about one thing, though. Sometimes kindness does need recognition." She pulled out a document from her desk. "How would you feel about officially joining our executive team as head of corporate security? It's time we acknowledged what you've really been doing all these years." Sebastian's eyes welled up as he accepted the offer letter. "Your father would be proud," he said softly. "No," Paige corrected him, looking at the city lights reflecting off her wedding ring, a ring she would soon remove. "He would say we're just getting started." That night, as the cleaning crew moved through Phelps Tower and the last executives headed home in their luxury cars, Paige remained in her office, planning her next moves. Simon's betrayal had taught her valuable lessons about trust, power, and the price of loyalty. But it had also shown her something else, that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from wealth or position, but from the quiet dignity of those who serve without seeking glory. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, shareholders to reassure, partnerships to rebuild, trust to restore. But tonight, Paige Phelps allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. She had faced betrayal and emerged stronger, protected her father's legacy, and discovered allies in unexpected places. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky as clear and hard as diamonds. In her hand, the sapphire pendant caught the light of a rising moon, its blue depths holding memories of easier days and simpler truths. But she was her father's daughter, and she knew that in the world of power and privilege, nothing worth having ever came easily. The morning sun glinted off One World Trade Center as Paige's Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through Manhattan's streets. 2 weeks had passed since Simon and Ashley's arrests, but the real battle was only beginning. Today's destination, Blackstone and Reed, the city's most formidable corporate law firm. "The vultures are circling, Mrs. Phelps," Regina Blackstone stated, her corner office offering a commanding view of the financial district. The attorney's Armani suit and Bulgari accessories spoke of success, but her reputation for ruthlessness had earned her the nickname, the Barracuda of Wall Street. "Morgan Technologies is threatening to withdraw from the merger," Regina continued, spreading documents across her mahogany desk, "and 3 hedge funds have begun accumulating shares. They smell blood in the water." Paige studied the reports, her mind already formulating counter-strategies. What about Simon's legal team? They're pushing for a plea deal. He's offering to surrender his shares in exchange for a reduced sentence. Regina's lips curved in a predatory smile. "He clearly doesn't know about your father's corporate governance amendments yet." "Let's keep it that way," Paige replied. "The longer his team wastes time on useless strategies, the better." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sebastian entered, now dressed in a tailored suit that reflected his new executive position. "Mrs. Phelps, we've found something in the encrypted files from Simon's private server." The documents he presented revealed a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts, but more importantly, they showed connections to Viktor Petrov, a Russian oligarch known for hostile takeovers of vulnerable companies. "This goes deeper than corporate theft," Sebastian explained. "Simon was setting up a takeover. He was going to use the chaos from your removal to help Petrov acquire controlling interest through various proxy companies." Regina leaned forward, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "Petrov's been trying to enter the US tech market for years. This would have given him a foothold in sensitive industries. And access to our military contracts," Paige added, the full scope of Simon's betrayal becoming clear. "Contact the Defense Department. They need to know about this security breach." Over the next few hours, Paige's world expanded and contracted like a living thing. Conference calls with military officials, emergency meetings with the board, each revelation adding new layers to the crisis. But as she sat in her father's study that evening, watching the city lights flicker on, Paige felt something she hadn't experienced since this ordeal began. Clarity. Her iPhone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Mom, when are you coming home? Alex keeps asking about Dad." The message hit her like a physical blow. In her focus on saving the company, she'd been neglecting her children's emotional needs. They'd lost their father to betrayal, and now their mother was absent, fighting corporate wars. "Mrs. Phelps," Sebastian appeared in the doorway. "The SEC wants another statement, and Morgan's CEO is demanding a meeting and—" "Cancel everything," Paige interrupted, grabbing her coat. "Family comes first. That's what Dad always said, and I've been forgetting his most important lesson." At home, she found Madison and Alexander in the media room, their homework spread across the custom Italian leather sofa. The tension in their young faces broke her heart. "How about pizza?" she suggested, kicking off her Louboutins. "From that little place in Brooklyn Dad always said was too far to deliver." For the next few hours, Paige Phelps wasn't a CEO or an heiress. She was just a mother, listening to her children's fears, answering their questions about their father's absence, and promising that while their world had changed, their family's love hadn't. The next morning, she arrived at Phelps Tower with renewed purpose. The corporate warfare continued, but now she approached it with different eyes. "Sebastian," she called, "get me everything we have on our employees' benefit packages, especially healthcare and family support." He looked confused. "The benefit packages? Simon's betrayal hurt our corporate family, not just our bottom line. It's time we showed our people that loyalty goes both ways." Over the next few days, Paige implemented a series of changes that shocked the corporate world. Enhanced benefits for all employees, a profit-sharing program that extended to every level of the company, a foundation to support employees' families in crisis, named in honor of Sebastian's daughter. The financial press called it naive. Market analysts predicted disaster. But then something unexpected happened. Productivity soared. Employee loyalty strengthened. The company's stock, after an initial dip, began to climb. "It's not just about making money," she explained to a skeptical board. "It's about building something that lasts." Dad understood that, now I do too. But corporate warfare continued on other fronts. Viktor Petrov made his move, using proxy companies to launch a hostile takeover attempt. The business media circled like vultures, predicting the fall of the Phelps empire. That's when Paige revealed her masterstroke. Working with Regina Blackstone, she had quietly been building her own network of allies, small tech companies that Simon had dismissed, female executives who'd been overlooked for promotions, family-owned businesses that shared her values. Together, they formed a coalition that not only blocked Petrov's takeover attempt, but also opened new opportunities for growth. The Morgan merger, rather than collapsing, transformed into a more equitable partnership. "Your father would be proud," Regina commented after the contracts were signed, "but he might not recognize the company you're building. It's becoming something new." "That's the point," Paige replied. "Dad built this company for his time. I'm building it for the future." 1 month after Simon's arrest, Paige stood before the assembled employees in the Phelps Tower lobby. The space had been transformed. The cold marble softened by living walls of green plants. The corporate mission statement, once etched in steel, now shared space with photos of employees and their families. "We've been through a storm," she began, her voice carrying to every corner. "But storms don't just destroy, they clear the air, they make room for new growth." She gestured to the changes around them. "This is no longer just a corporation. It's a community. And while we'll never be immune to betrayal, we can build something stronger than any individual's greed." That evening, as her Rolls-Royce carried her home to her children, Paige fingered her father's sapphire pendant. The weight of it felt different now, not a burden of legacy, but a reminder of values worth preserving and lessons learned. Sebastian sat across from her, reviewing security protocols on his tablet. "The board meeting tomorrow can wait," Paige interrupted with a smile. "I'm having dinner with my kids, the most important shareholders in my life." As the car glided through the city streets, Paige reflected on her transformation. She was no longer just Richard Phelps's daughter or Simon Blake's betrayed wife. She had become her own kind of leader, one who understood that true strength came not from power over others, but from empowering others. The sun was setting behind the skyscrapers, painting the city in shades of gold and promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles in the corporate arena, but Paige Phelps was ready. She had learned that while betrayal could break you, it could also remake you into something stronger, something better. The next morning brought fresh challenges. A consortium of Chinese investors, sensing opportunity in the chaos, had begun accumulating shares through various shell companies. Their strategy was clear: take advantage of the company's vulnerable position to gain a foothold in American technology. "They're working with one of Simon's old contacts," Sebastian reported, laying out a complex web of transactions on the holographic display in Paige's office. "A hedge fund manager named Marcus Wong. He was at your wedding." Paige remembered him. The quiet man who'd given them a Ming Dynasty vase worth millions. Another snake in designer clothing. "Contact our friends at the Committee on Foreign Investment. This isn't just a corporate takeover, it's a national security issue." But even as she fought external threats, Paige was implementing internal changes that would reshape the company's DNA. The Phelps Foundation, once primarily focused on traditional charitable giving, was transformed into an incubator for employee-driven innovations. "Your father believed in noblesse oblige," Thomas Chen observed during a strategy session in the newly renovated boardroom, where the old oil paintings of past executives had been replaced with digital displays showing real-time employee initiatives around the globe. "But this is something different. Dad built walls to protect what we had," Paige replied, adjusting her Cartier watch. "I'm building bridges to create something new." The transformation wasn't without its costs. Several old guard executives resigned, uncomfortable with the new direction. Market analysts continued to question her leadership, suggesting that emotional decisions were driving business strategy. But Paige had learned something vital through adversity. The strongest positions aren't always the most obvious ones. While her critics focused on quarterly reports, she was building something more valuable, loyalty that couldn't be bought. One morning, as she was reviewing acquisition proposals in her father's study, her daughter Madison appeared in the doorway. "Mom, I found this in Dad's old things," she said, holding out a leather-bound journal. "I think you should see it." The journal contained Simon's private thoughts over the years, including his early days at Phelps Industries. The entries revealed a man consumed by inadequacy, desperate to prove himself worthy of the Phelps name. His betrayal, Paige realized, hadn't started with greed. It had grown from insecurity. "I need to show you something," she told her daughter, leading her to the company's historical archives in the sub-basement. Among the climate-controlled displays of corporate memorabilia was a section dedicated to Richard Phelps's early years. "Your grandfather started with nothing," Paige explained, showing Madison photos of a young Richard Phelps working from a tiny office in Queens. "He built this company by believing in people, not just profits. That's the real Phelps legacy, not the buildings or the bank accounts, but the lives we touch." The lesson wasn't lost on Madison. The next day, she asked to intern in the company's new employee wellness department, wanting to learn the business from the ground up. As autumn turned to winter, Paige's transformation of Phelps Industries began showing measurable results. Employee retention reached record highs. Innovation metrics soared. The stock price, after months of volatility, stabilized and began to climb. Even Viktor Petrov was forced to admit defeat, selling his proxy holdings at a loss. The Chinese consortium, faced with regulatory scrutiny and united employee opposition, withdrew their takeover bid. But perhaps the most significant change was in Paige herself. The betrayal that could have hardened her had instead opened her heart to new possibilities. She had learned that true strength wasn't in avoiding vulnerability, but in using it to connect with others. During the company's annual holiday gala, now held not in a luxurious hotel, but in the transformed Phelps Tower lobby, where employees' families mingled freely with executives, Paige found herself standing beside Sebastian, near the sterling silver punch bowl. "Your father once told me something," Sebastian said, watching his granddaughter play with Alexander near the massive Christmas tree. "He said the measure of a person isn't in how they handle success, but in how they handle betrayal." Paige touched her father's sapphire pendant, its blue depths holding memories of both pain and promise. "What do you think he'd say about how I handled it?" Sebastian smiled, his new Brioni suit a reminder of how much had changed while his warmth remained the same. "I think he'd say you didn't just handle it, you transformed it. You took his legacy and made it stronger by making it bigger than just one family." As if to punctuate his words, Madison approached with a group of young interns, eager to share their ideas for expanding the employee wellness program. Their enthusiasm was infectious, their vision unclouded by old corporate hierarchies. Paige listened, really listened, feeling the pulse of the new company she was building. The betrayal that had threatened to destroy everything had instead catalyzed a metamorphosis. Phelps Industries wasn't just surviving, it was evolving. Her phone buzzed with another message from the Wall Street Journal, seeking comment on rumors that Simon was negotiating a tell-all book deal from prison. But Paige just smiled, knowing that no exposé could harm what she'd built. The true story wasn't in past betrayals, but in future possibilities. "Tell them," she texted back, "that sometimes the best revenge isn't in destroying what others build, but in building something they could never imagine." Around her, the celebration continued, a testament to the new culture she had fostered. Employee families, security staff, executives, and maintenance crews mingled freely, their shared purpose stronger than any artificial barriers of rank or privilege: that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles in the corporate arena. But Paige Phelps was ready. She had learned that while betrayal could break you, it could also remake you into something stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. And in that transformation lay the greatest victory of all. The Southern District Court of New York stood as an imposing sentinel of justice, its neoclassical facade a stark contrast to the sleek glass towers of the financial district. Inside courtroom 2B, the air crackled with tension as Judge Eleanor Montgomery adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses, preparing to hear what the media had dubbed the corporate trial of the century. Paige sat at the plaintiff's table, her Chanel suit a suit of armor in pearl gray. Regina Blackstone sat beside her, surrounded by towers of evidence boxes and a team of associates, wielding tablets loaded with digital exhibits. Across the aisle, Simon's legal team from White & Warren occupied their side of the battlefield, their client conspicuously absent. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Montgomery took her seat. "Criminal case number 2025 CR 789, United States of America versus Simon Blake and Ashley Morrison." The gallery behind them was packed with journalists, financial analysts, and curious members of New York's elite. Paige could feel their eyes on her, hungry for any sign of weakness. But years of boardroom battles had taught her to wear composure like her Graf diamonds, flawlessly and with quiet authority. Simon entered in handcuffs, his Savile Row suit hanging loosely on his frame after 3 months in federal detention. Ashley followed, her designer wardrobe replaced by department store businesswear that seemed to physically pain her to wear. Their eyes met Paige's briefly, Simon still burning with defiance, Ashley swimming with desperate fear. "Your Honor," Charles Warren III, Simon's lead counsel, began his opening statement. "What we have here is a family dispute that's been criminalized by an overzealous prosecution. My client's actions, while perhaps ethically questionable, were within his rights as chief operating officer and husband to Mrs. Phelps." Regina rose smoothly. "Your Honor, what we have here is a calculated criminal conspiracy that nearly destroyed a cornerstone of American industry. The evidence will show that Mr. Blake and Ms. Morrison engaged in wire fraud, corporate espionage, and attempted theft of trade secrets with national security implications." The first week of trial passed in a blur of technical testimony. Financial experts detailed the complex web of offshore accounts. Cybersecurity specialists mapped out the digital trail of corporate espionage. But it was the human element that captivated the courtroom. Thomas Chen testified about discovering irregularities in the merger documents. "The numbers were too perfect," he explained. "In 20 years of corporate finance, I've never seen an integration plan without friction points. It was like someone was painting by numbers rather than doing real analysis." Viktor Petrov appeared via video link from Moscow, his testimony carefully negotiated through diplomatic channels. "Mr. Blake approached me," he admitted, his accent thick with disdain. "He said he could deliver Phelps Industries military contracts if I helped him gain control. I should have known better than to trust an American who would betray his own family. But it was Ashley Morrison who delivered the first bombshell. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she agreed to testify against Simon. Her hands trembled as she took the stand, unable to meet her former lover's eyes. It wasn't just about money, she revealed. Simon said he deserved to run the company. He said Richard Phelps had humiliated him, treating him like a trophy husband. The plan started small, just accessing some files we shouldn't have. But then Simon met Mr. Petrov at a charity gala, and everything escalated. Simon's face remained impassive, but Paige saw his jaw clench at the betrayal. It was a familiar expression. She'd seen it in her mirror every day since discovering his deception. The defense tried to paint Ashley as an unreliable witness, suggesting she was lying to save herself. But then came the evidence that would change everything. Sebastian's testimony. He entered the courtroom in a new suit that somehow didn't diminish his essential dignity. The years of watching and waiting had led to this moment, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly why he was there. "Mr. Torres," Regina began, "please tell the court about your role at Phelps Industries." "Officially, I was head of building maintenance," Sebastian explained. "Unofficially, I was part of a security system Richard Phelps put in place years ago. He believed that the best way to protect the company was to have eyes and ears everywhere, especially in places people thought didn't matter." "Objection," Warren shot to his feet. This testimony about a deceased person's alleged statements is hearsay. Your Honor, Regina countered, we have documentary evidence of Mr. Torres's special appointment, signed by Richard Phelps himself. Judge Montgomery reviewed the documents. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Torres. Sebastian described years of careful observation, the late-night meetings in supposedly empty offices, the whispered phone calls in service corridors, the gradual accumulation of evidence that something was wrong. But the moment I knew for certain was when I overheard Mr. Blake on the phone with Mr. Petrov. Sebastian continued. He was in the executive bathroom. People often forget about maintenance access panels. He was laughing about how Mrs. Phelps would never see it coming, how her father's outdated ideas about loyalty would be her downfall. The courtroom fell silent as Sebastian reached into his jacket and produced a small digital recorder. I began recording everything after that. Mr. Phelps had always said that in business, trust needs verification. Warren leaped up again. Your Honor, any such recordings would be inadmissible. This is a violation of privacy laws. Regina smiled. Your Honor, Phelps Industries Employee Handbook, which Mr. Blake signed annually as COO, explicitly states that all areas of the building are subject to monitoring for security purposes. We have Mr. Blake's signed acknowledgements for the past 15 years. The recordings played through the courtroom's sound system. Simon's voice, dripping with contempt, detailed plans to destroy the company Richard Phelps had built. Conversations with Petrov about military contracts. Meetings with Ashley where they laughed about Page's trust. But it was a conversation with Richard Phelps himself, recorded months before his death, that proved most devastating. I know what you're doing, Simon. Richard's voice, already weakened by illness, emerged from the speakers. The offshore accounts, the meetings with Petrov. Did you think I wouldn't find out? You're dying, Richard, Simon's voice replied coldly. What are you going to do about it? Nothing, Richard answered. I'm giving you a chance to prove me wrong. To be the man my daughter believes you are. Don't make me regret that choice. Page's hand flew to her father's sapphire pendant as tears threatened to fall. Even facing betrayal, her father had chosen hope over vengeance. She finally understood. It wasn't weakness that had stayed his hand, but wisdom. Simon's composure finally cracked. He was a fool, he shouted, rising from his chair. All that power, all that wealth, and he wasted it on outdated notions of loyalty and trust. I could have made Phelps Industries a global force. Order! Judge Montgomery's gavel cracked like thunder. Mr. Blake, control yourself or you'll be removed from this courtroom. The trial's momentum shifted decisively after Sebastian's testimony. More witnesses came forward. Employees who had seen signs but feared speaking up. Executives who had been approached about joining Simon's conspiracy. Even Madison took the stand to describe changes she'd noticed in her father's behavior. During a brief recess, Page found Sebastian in the courthouse corridor, staring out at the city through rain-streaked windows. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked softly. Your father made me promise to give Simon a chance, Sebastian replied. He believed that sometimes people need the opportunity to choose the right path for themselves, but he also made me promise to protect you if Simon made the wrong choice. The trial's final days brought a parade of expert witnesses and character testimony. Simon's defense team tried to paint him as a victim of corporate politics, a talented executive frustrated by nepotism and outdated management styles. But the evidence was overwhelming. After 4 weeks of testimony, Judge Montgomery faced the packed courtroom for her verdict. The silence was absolute as she began to speak. Mr. Blake, you orchestrated a complex criminal conspiracy that threatened not only a single company, but potentially national security. Your actions were motivated not by necessity or desperation, but by greed and wounded pride. This court sentences you to 12 years in federal prison. She turned to Ashley Morrison. Ms. Morrison, while you have cooperated with the prosecution, your willing participation in this conspiracy cannot be overlooked. You are sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. As federal marshals led the defendants away, Simon turned to face Page one last time. You'll never be the leader your father was, he spat. Page rose, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. No, I won't be. I'll be better. Because I learned what Dad knew all along. True power isn't in what you can take, but in what you can build together. Outside the courthouse, rain had given way to weak sunshine. Reporters clamored for statements as Page descended the steps, Sebastian and Regina flanking her like guardian angels. "Mrs. Phelps, what's next for the company? How will this verdict affect the Morgan merger? Any comment on Viktor Petrov's statement about American corporate vulnerability?" Paige paused, looking out over the sea of cameras and microphones. Phelps Industries was built on trust, innovation, and the belief that success shouldn't come at the cost of our humanity. Today's verdict isn't just about punishing wrongdoing, it's about affirming those values. We're not just going to survive this crisis, we're going to transform it into an opportunity to build something even stronger. Later that evening, in her father's study, Paige sat with Madison and Alexander, looking through old family photos. The children had questions about their father, about betrayal, about trust. "Your grandfather used to say something," Paige told them, holding her father's pendant. "He said that every crisis is also an opportunity, not just to survive, but to become something better than you were before." That evening, as the media frenzy continued outside the courthouse, Paige received an unexpected visitor in her office. Marcus Wong, the hedge fund manager who had worked with Simon, arrived unannounced, his usual confidence replaced by visible unease. "Mrs. Phelps," he began, fidgeting with his Patek Philippe watch. "There's something you need to know, something that didn't come out in court." He produced a sleek leather portfolio containing documents that revealed an even deeper layer of Simon's betrayal. The Chinese consortium hadn't been working independently. They were part of a larger strategy orchestrated by Viktor Petrov, using Simon as his American puppet. Simon wasn't just after control of Phelps Industries, Marcus explained. He was setting up a complex network of technology transfers that would have compromised national security. I helped him set up some of the financial structures, but when I realized the full scope, Paige studied the documents, her mind racing. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because there's more at stake than corporate politics," Marcus replied. "And because your father once did something for me that I never told anyone about. When my mother was sick, Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "He arranged for her to receive experimental treatment in Switzerland, never asked for anything in return, never even mentioned it again." The revelation hit Paige like a physical force. How many lives had her father touched in ways she never knew? How many quiet acts of kindness had helped build the true foundation of his empire? Late that night, alone in her father's study, Paige made a series of calls to the FBI's counterintelligence division, to the Pentagon's Technology Security Office, to trusted contacts in international law enforcement. The web of betrayal Simon had woven was larger than anyone had imagined, and its unraveling would have global implications. Sebastian appeared at her door as midnight approached. "Mrs. Phelps, there's something else you should see." He handed her a worn leather journal, her father's private diary from his last years. The entries revealed that Richard Phelps had suspected Simon's betrayal even earlier than anyone knew, but rather than expose him immediately, he had meticulously documented everything, building a failsafe that would protect not just the company, but the country's technological secrets. "Your father knew he was dying," Sebastian explained softly. "He knew Simon would make his move after he was gone, so he put pieces in place. People like me, hidden protocols, secure data caches. He turned his own mortality into a trap for those who would destroy what he built." Paige read entry after entry, seeing her father's brilliant strategic mind at work, even as his body failed him. The amendments to the corporate charter, Sebastian's secret role, the hidden surveillance systems, all part of an elaborate chess game played from beyond the grave. The next morning, Paige called an emergency board meeting. The directors gathered in the conference room, still buzzing with discussion of the trial's outcome. "Ladies and gentlemen," Paige began, "what you saw in court was only part of the story." She laid out the new evidence, explaining the international implications and the additional security measures her father had put in place. Richard Phelps wasn't just protecting a company, she concluded. He was protecting American innovation itself, and now it's our turn to carry that responsibility forward. The board's response was unanimous. New security protocols were approved, international partnerships were reviewed, and a comprehensive technology protection framework was put in place. As the days passed, the full impact of the trial reverberated through the corporate world. Stock markets adjusted, alliances shifted, and a new era of corporate governance began to emerge. Paige's transformation of Phelps Industries became a case study in business schools, not just for its handling of betrayal, but for its revolution in corporate culture. 1 month after the verdict, Page stood in the newly redesigned lobby of Phelps Tower. The space had been transformed, but her father's portrait still held its place of honor. Beside it now hung a new installation, a digital wall displaying the thousands of employees who made up the Phelps corporate family, their faces changing in a constant reminder of the human element in business. Madison and Alexander joined her, their young faces reflected in the polished marble. "Mum," Madison asked, "do you think Grandpa knew this would happen? All of it?" Page touched her father's sapphire pendant, feeling its familiar weight. "I think he knew that sometimes the biggest threats come from those closest to us, but he also knew that true strength isn't in avoiding betrayal. It's in building something stronger than any individual's greed." The evening sun painted Manhattan's skyline in shades of gold and promise, its light reflecting off the buildings Simon had once coveted. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the Morgan merger to complete, employee trust to rebuild, a corporate culture to transform. But tonight, Page Phelps sat with her children in the house her father built, knowing that while betrayal had cost them much, it had also shown them the true meaning of loyalty, courage, and the power of choosing hope over fear. The legacy of betrayal had become a legacy of transformation, and in the end, that was perhaps the greatest victory of all. 6 months after the verdict, the Manhattan skyline glittered beneath a winter sunset as Page Phelps stood in her father's study, now transformed into a testament to both tradition and change. The antique Baroque desk remained, but it now faced a wall of interactive displays showing real-time data from Phelps Industries' global operations. The old oil paintings shared space with digital art installations, a bridge between past and future that seemed to capture the essence of her transformed empire. Regina Blackstone sat in one of the leather club chairs, reviewing the final settlement documents. "The last of Petrov's shell companies has been untangled," she reported, her Hermes scarf catching the light. "The national security implications alone will keep him occupied with federal investigators for years." "And the Morgan merger?" Page asked, though she already knew the answer. The past months had seen a complete restructuring of the deal, transforming it from Simon's Trojan horse into a genuine partnership. "Proceeding better than expected," Thomas Chen interjected, entering with a stack of financial reports. "Their R&D team is already collaborating with ours on the new quantum computing initiative. The synergies your father saw are finally being realized." Page moved to the window, watching snow begin to fall on the city below. The weather matched her mood, contemplative, clean, full of possibility. The corporate wars were over, but their cost had been high. Madison had struggled in school after the trial, the media attention and her father's imprisonment taking their toll. Alexander had developed anxiety, requiring weekly sessions with a child psychologist. The personal price of victory weighed heavily on Page's conscience. A gentle knock at the door announced Sebastian's arrival. His new position as Chief of Corporate Security had come with an office on the executive floor, but he still moved with the quiet dignity that had characterized his years of hidden service. "The new security protocols are fully implemented," he reported, "and there's something else you should see." He handed her a leather-bound portfolio, the complete record of her father's secret preparations, including entries they hadn't known existed. "He knew about Ashley before Simon did," Sebastian explained as Page read. "He saw the pattern forming and started documenting everything. There's more. Contingency plans, hidden accounts, protective measures we haven't even activated yet." Page settled behind the desk, its worn leather surface holding decades of corporate history. "He thought of everything, didn't he?" "Almost everything," Sebastian smiled. "He didn't anticipate how you would transform his defensive strategies into something more revolutionary." The transformation of Phelps Industries had indeed been revolutionary. The employee ownership program had expanded, giving workers at all levels a stake in the company's success. The Phelps Foundation had evolved into a pioneer in corporate responsibility, funding everything from environmental initiatives to educational programs. But perhaps the most significant change was in the corporate culture itself. The old hierarchies had given way to a more collaborative structure, while maintaining the excellence and innovation that had always characterized the Phelps name. "Mrs. Phelps?" Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "The children are here for dinner, and the board members are assembled in the conference room for the video call." Page checked her Cartier watch. Time for the quarterly global leadership meeting. But first, family dinner. She had learned that lesson well. No corporate victory was worth sacrificing personal connections. In the executive dining room, Madison and Alexander were already seated at the custom-made oak table, their homework spread around their plates. The room's decor reflected Paige's new philosophy, luxurious but welcoming, powerful but not intimidating. "How was school?" she asked, noting the dark circles under Madison's eyes. The media spotlight had been particularly hard on her teenage daughter. "Better," Madison replied, pushing away her calculus textbook. "The college counselor says my essay about everything that happened might actually help with applications. Something about demonstrating resilience in the face of adversity." Alexander looked up from his history book. "We learned about corporate ethics today. The teacher used Phelps Industries as an example of good governance." Paige felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. Her children had been forced to grow up too quickly, but they had also learned valuable lessons about integrity and perseverance. After dinner, she made her way to the conference room where the board members' faces filled a wall of high-definition screens. The quarterly meeting was more than just a business review. It was a celebration of how far they had come. "The numbers tell a compelling story," Thomas Chen began his presentation. "Employee satisfaction up 42%. Innovation metrics at record levels. Stock price stabilized well above pre-crisis levels. But it was the human metrics that truly captured the transformation. Employee retention had soared. The company's mentorship programs were being studied by business schools. The Phelps name had become synonymous not just with success, but with ethical leadership." As the meeting concluded, Victoria Hartley, their oldest board member, spoke up. "Richard would be proud," she said softly, "not just of the company's success, but of how you've honored his values while creating something new." Later that evening, as the snow continued to fall, Paige found herself back in the study. The day's final task awaited, a letter that had arrived from Simon, forwarded by his prison counselor. The envelope lay on the desk like a landmine, its federal prison markings stark against the leather surface. With steady hands, Paige opened it and began to read. "Paige, prison provides ample time for reflection. I've thought about power, ambition, and the price of betrayal. You were right. I never understood what made Phelps Industries truly great. I saw the wealth, the influence, but missed the foundation of trust that supported it all. I watch the business news. I see what you've built from the ashes of my betrayal. It's not what your father created. It's something more, something I never could have built, because I lacked the one thing you and Richard always had, the ability to see beyond your own ambition. I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now what I destroyed, and I see the greater thing you've created in its place. Simon." Paige placed the letter in her father's old safe, alongside the evidence that had exposed Simon's conspiracy. It was another chapter in their story, but no longer the defining one. A text from Madison lit up her phone. "Mom, can we have breakfast tomorrow? Just us." "Of course, sweetheart. I'll make Dad's special pancakes." Setting down her phone, Paige touched the sapphire pendant that had become both comfort and reminder. The betrayal that had threatened to destroy them had instead catalyzed a transformation. Phelps Industries wasn't just a corporate entity anymore. It was a testament to the power of turning crisis into opportunity. Sebastian appeared in the doorway. "The new security briefing is ready, but it can wait until morning." Paige smiled, already reaching for her coat. "Family first, right? That's what Dad always said." As they walked through the quiet corridors of Phelps Tower, Paige reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The betrayal had cost them dearly. Trust shattered, innocence lost, relationships broken. But from those ashes had risen something stronger, a new kind of corporate legacy built on transparency, collaboration, and shared purpose. Outside, the snow continued to fall on Manhattan, coating the city's sharp edges in pristine white. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that success and integrity could coexist. But tonight, Paige Phelps walked through the empire she had not just saved but transformed, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding betrayal, but from learning how to rise above it. The sapphire pendant caught the light as she stepped into her waiting car, its blue depths holding memories of both loss and triumph. In the end, Simon's betrayal hadn't destroyed Richard Phelps's legacy. It had forced it to evolve into something even he couldn't have imagined. And in that evolution lay the greatest victory of all. 5 years later, The Harvard Business School auditorium fell silent as Paige Phelps took the stage, her presence as commanding as ever. The spotlight caught her father's sapphire pendant, now a symbol not just of inheritance but of transformation. "Leadership isn't about avoiding crises," she began, addressing the eager faces of tomorrow's business leaders. "It's about transforming them into opportunities for growth." In the front row, Madison sat proudly, now a junior at Harvard herself, studying business and ethics, a combination that would have seemed naive in the pre-scandal corporate world. Alexander, a high school sophomore, filmed the speech on his phone, already showing the same keen eye for detail that had characterized his grandfather. The Phelps industry's story had become a Harvard Business School case study, taught alongside other corporate transformations. But unlike most case studies, this one was still evolving. Sebastian, now Executive Vice President of Corporate Security and Ethics, had revolutionized how companies approached internal governance. His invisible guardian model had been adopted by corporations worldwide, proving that the best security came not from walls, but from creating a culture of integrity. Thomas Chen had retired the previous year, but not before seeing the Morgan merger blossom into the most successful technology partnership of the decade. The quantum computing initiative he had overseen had transformed everything from cryptography to climate modeling. Regina Blackstone had become the nation's leading expert on corporate ethics law, her experience with the Phelps case informing new legislation on corporate governance. She still served as Phelps Industries' chief counsel, her Hermes scarves and Barracuda reputation unchanged. Viktor Petrov had faced his own reckonings. The exposure of his attempted corporate espionage had led to international sanctions and the collapse of his business empire. His fall served as a warning to others who might attempt to exploit corporate betrayals for geopolitical gain. Ashley Morrison had been released after serving 6 years, her testimony having earned her a reduced sentence. She worked now at a small non-profit, her experiences contributing to programs helping white-collar criminals reintegrate into society. And Simon? He remained in federal prison, his release still years away. His tell-all book had failed to find a publisher. The world had moved on, more interested in how companies could prevent betrayals than in the justifications of those who committed them. After her speech, Paige walked through Harvard Yard with her children, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. The campus had changed little since her own days as a student, but she had changed enormously. "Mom," Madison said, linking arms with her mother, "tell me again about the day you knew everything would be okay." Paige smiled, touching the sapphire pendant. "It wasn't a single day. It was realizing that what we thought would destroy us had actually forced us to become stronger. Your grandfather used to say that true strength isn't in the ability to prevent falls, but in how you rise afterward." The Phelps Tower still dominated the Manhattan skyline, but it was different now. Solar panels gleamed on its facade, and its once exclusive top floors had been transformed into collaborative spaces where employees from all levels could work together. The building, like the company itself, had evolved while keeping its core strength. The price of victory had been high, trust broken, innocence lost, relationships shattered, but from those costs had come invaluable lessons about resilience, integrity, and the true meaning of legacy. That evening, in Richard Phelps's study, now a museum piece preserved exactly as he left it, Paige sat with Sebastian, sharing a quiet moment before the next board meeting. "Your father once told me," Sebastian said, his hair now fully gray, but his dignity unchanged, "that every empire faces its greatest test not in its rise, but in how it handles betrayal." Paige nodded, looking out at the city lights. He was right, but what he didn't tell us was that sometimes betrayal is just the beginning of a better story. The sapphire pendant caught the light, its blue depths holding memories of both loss and triumph. The legacy of betrayal had become a legacy of transformation, and in that transformation lay the greatest victory of all. For in the end, Paige Phelps had not just preserved her father's empire, she had transformed it into something he could never have imagined, but would have deeply understood, a testament to the power of turning wounds into wisdom and crisis into opportunity. The sun set on Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of promise, as another generation of Phelps leadership prepared to carry that legacy forward, armed with the hard-won knowledge that sometimes the deepest betrayals lead to the most profound transformations. Hey there, how would you handle a similar situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's dive into a discussion about the choices that truly define who we are. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you missed our last story, here's a glimpse. He's a millionaire, she's a pregnant waitress. Years ago, they were husband and wife. Now they cross paths by chance in a cafe. He's with his new girlfriend. She's alone, struggling to move forward. When their eyes meet, time seems to stand still. He tries to speak, but her words aren't what he expected. Instead, they reveal a secret capable of turning both their worlds upside down. Amid painful truths and tough decisions, the past comes back to demand its price. Click the video on your screen now and dive into this raw, visceral story of regret, loss, and redemption. Can you watch until the end without questioning your own choices? See you there.